Story 1. Back in the 2000s, we were encouraged not to share personal information on the internet. Story 2. We spent a lot of time alone in the woods, doing God knows what whenever we wanted. Story 3. In the 1990s and earlier, you could go out and be unreachable. It was completely normal. Someone might call your house, get no answer, maybe leave a message, and that would be it. You would get in touch with them again sometime later. Story 4. It was awesome when a song you were hoping to hear came on the radio. Bonus points if you were ready to record it on a cassette tape and the disc jockey didn't talk over the intro or outro. Story 5. Catalogs were mailed to your house. You called the toll-free number, placed your order, and waited several weeks for it to arrive. Story 6. Every time I picked up the phone, I had no idea who might be calling. I could only move as far as the phone cord allowed. I still know my childhood phone number by heart. I remember having to install a mouse driver before I could use a mouse. All kids in the 80s knew how to use a computer from the command prompt. Story 7. I remember how slow the internet was. I kept a book next to the family personal computer to read while waiting for even purely text-based websites to load in the 1990s. Images took much longer to load. Story 8. You carried a dime, later a quarter, in case you needed to make a phone call. Coin telephones were everywhere. Story 9. If you wanted to hang out with your mate, you would go and knock on their house. If their parents said they were out, you would check the usual places where you hang out. Story 10. You could go to the electronics section to play video game demos while your parents shopped, usually unsupervised. Story 11. My kids are still shocked that when you missed a television show, that was it. Unless you figured out how to tape it, you weren't seeing it again until the summer. Now it's, I want to watch this episode of Pokemon on demand. Get off my lawn. Story 12. It used to be normal not to know where your children were or to be unable to reach them because they were outside. People did not expect to be reachable at all hours. There were far fewer security cameras then. Story 13. Obscure. Good music used to be hard to obtain. Someone often had to introduce you to it, or you had to visit an independent record store or order it. Having something exclusive that nobody else had was a major way to seem cool. Many things were like that, but music especially defined people's identities in a way it does not today. Subcultures such as goth, rave, and the hippie movement were much more serious then and often genuinely underground. Felt like joining a secret society. If you were not introduced, you often did not even know these things existed, and people outside them had never heard the music or understood it. I remember blasting drum and bass in a college dorm in the late 1990s and having people from other floors knock and ask what that was. They had never heard anything remotely like it. When MPEG-1 audio layer 3 files became common, that started to change. The shift accelerated with streaming services that host almost everything. If you cannot find a recording on Amazon, Spotify, or Apple Music, you can usually find it on YouTube, SoundCloud, or Bandcamp. Meanwhile, social media has effectively killed underground culture. It is hard to have an independent underground scene when people post everything to Instagram and Facebook. Story 14. If you were lost, you were truly lost. There were no smartphones or global positioning systems. Story 15. As a teenager in the 1990s, the future actually looked pretty good. Now that I am here, fucking hell. Story 16. We were more than willing to corrupt every file on our computers with viruses for free music on LimeWire. Story 17. Equipment manuals. Everyone had a manual for each piece of equipment. The technical detail they provided no longer exists. Story 18. I am genuinely sad for current and future generations. They will never experience the Wild West that the internet was in the 2000s. Faster than the 1990s in loading times, but not burdened by corporate content. Will you see a man beheaded today, a funny animation, or a cool music video? There was no way of telling. Mostly I miss that there was no major push for applications because touchscreen phones were not common yet, no explosion of streaming sites, and no constant sponsorships and advertisements in videos. Addicting games, Newgrounds, Armor Games, YouTube, and a couple of others I am likely forgetting come to mind. It was a brief 10 or so years of pure, efficient internet compared with the 1990s. Story 19. Cigarette smoke was everywhere. inside restaurants, elevators, hospitals, bars, and more. That is why many hard plastic products made before 2008 are slightly brown. White plastic became discolored quickly. Story 20. You know when you have a question that you do not know the answer to, and everyone argues about it, and then eventually someone breaks out their phone and settles the matter? That was not a thing. Unless someone happened to have relevant, definitive knowledge on the subject or was willing to go somewhere else, like a library, and do actual research, you would basically just be stuck not knowing the truth. For example, when I was a kid, I used to tell my parents and friends that I had seen a movie with Michael Jackson where he fights an animated rabbit through dance, then turns into a robot and later into a spaceship. They assumed I was insane or describing a fever dream. Since the Internet Movie Database did not exist, I did not find out until my 20s about the existence of Moonwalker, the mad personal project film he made in which he does all those things and much more. Story 21. When I talk about how you would make a collect call and say your name was Dad, pick me up at Cineplex, my dad would hang up, and 15 to 30 minutes later he would arrive to pick me up. How we communicated was so different, and my kids just do not get it. They ask, what Cineplex? What time? Did they not have a tracker? What if they did not answer the phone? The idea that people answered the phone when it rang still blows them away. They ask, what if you did not know who was on the other end? Story 22. Making money used to be slow. Paper checks were common, and banks closed at 5. We waited days for deposits. There were no instant transfers, gig applications, or ways to sell online in minutes. Kids today can make money from their phones faster than we could cash a paycheck. Story 23. Oh, where to start? The idea that others could be out of touch for hours or days at a time, and nobody took issue with it. The idea that you did not have a camera, especially one with video capabilities, in your pocket at all times. The fact that you had to wait for news. If you were not able to watch the new episode of your favorite show when it aired on television, you missed it or had to program a third-party device to record it on tape. I could go on. Story 24. You had to answer the phone without knowing who was calling. Story 25. From those of us who grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, fuck you for making me feel so old. Story 26. I'm watching my friends' young children hate commercials. I have to tell them that not only do I have to have commercials, but I didn't get to pick what was on the television. I just had to watch it. Story 27. Hanging out with friends was very different. Cell phones were not ubiquitous and were almost unheard of among children. We had forts in the woods, by the train tracks, or in other random spots. I used to play games with my friends in a house that was under construction. The workers would be gone by 3:30 in the afternoon, and we would sneak in and hang out. We played silly games and goofed off. We were careful not to disturb anything so we would not get caught. You could not do that today. Story 28. It took an hour to download a 3-minute song, and that was if you were lucky and the other person did not disconnect at 99%. Story 29. In the United States, trick-or-treating was from sunset until 10 p.m. All you needed was a pillowcase. Story 30. I was 16, picking up my new girlfriend from her house for the first time. I looked up directions on MapQuest on our home computer and printed them. I tried to follow them but missed a turn somewhere. I could not update the printout and had no way to call or text. Then I realized I was near a friend's house. I went there to borrow his family's only phone to call her and get better directions. I knocked. Nobody answered. I went around the back, found the basement door unlocked, entered the house, used his phone to call my girlfriend and figure out how to get there. Then left a note explaining I had broken into his house and why. Not weird at all. Story 31. If someone had a boombox with batteries and decent cassettes, they were the center of their circle of friends. Story 32. I walked a couple of miles to school every day. Parents did not drive any of us. We walked, rode bikes, or took the bus. Story 33. When we needed to do research, we went to the library, consulted the Dewey Decimal System to find the book, borrowed it, read the chapters, and handwrote the essay. Assignments were completed without Google or artificial intelligence. We relied on the school library. Story 34. Back in the 1990s, people who used the internet for dating or finding a significant other were mostly viewed negatively. Although some stigma remains, it is much less now. Story 35. Magazine subscriptions arrived in the mail. It was so much fun to come home from school and find that my favorite magazine had been delivered. Story 36. I remember waking up at 4 a.m. while it was snowing to watch the Weather Channel to see if our school's number appeared for a snow day, or listening to the radio to hear it. If you missed the announcement, you had to wait until they read the list again. Once our school called it late, I had already been at the bus stop with other kids for an hour before a parent came by to tell us we finally had a snow day. I was furious. Story 37. We used to have privacy, and no one would ever have thought of giving their personal information to random corporations. Story 38. You should leave a note on the table before you consider going out anywhere. Also, the classic move. I would say I was sleeping over at a friend's house, and they would say they were sleeping over at mine. Then there were house parties and everyone was laughing out loud. Story 39. If you took a picture, you often did not see it until a week later. If the pictures were all bad, that was how it was. Story 40. We remembered phone numbers, not just for family members and close friends, but also for local restaurants and other services we used often. If you wanted to meet up with people, you showed up at the predetermined time, and if they were not already there, you did not know why, whether they were a bit late or had stood you up. Being late had greater consequences. If you were into a television show that was not the most popular, you had to tune in when it was broadcast. If you missed the episode, you did not know what happened, possibly ever, unless it received a home release that you would have to buy later. On the plus side, if all your friends were into that show, you would all be caught up at the same time. The next day, you could all talk about it without spoilers. Story 41. Netflix videos on compact discs are shipped to your house and must be mailed back. Story 42. After I got my driver's license the Friday I turned 16, there were stretches when I rarely saw my parents from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I had morning practice or weightlifting at 6:30 a.m. Attended school all day, then had afternoon practice or weightlifting, and went to my job. I was pretty much required to go to church at 10 a.m. On Sundays, have lunch at noon with one set of grandparents, and dinner at 5 p.m. with the other set. I did not have a curfew after I turned 16 and would often not get home until 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights, and I was expected to maintain a 3.5 grade point average where 99% was an F. Story 43. The biggest thing I have not seen mentioned is proper unstimulated boredom. Before phones, you would show up to an appointment and just sit there, maybe flip through an old magazine. Sometimes you could not use the internet because your brother was on the phone, or you could not watch television because your sister's favorite show was on. Even getting together with friends usually led to, "So what do you guys want to do?" Shenanigans and memories came from trying to figure out how to defeat boredom. I remember driving about 45 minutes to hang out with a friend from summer camp, only to end up walking around big lots and putting a funny mix of items in a cart, hoping someone would find it and wonder, what is this person doing? Story 44. You could do stupid things without someone recording them on a phone camera. Story 45. You could tell people to meet me here at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, and they would be there on time. Story 46. People used to read the back of cereal boxes while eating breakfast and the back of shampoo bottles while using the bathroom, laughing out loud. They kept baskets of books in their bathrooms, usually trivia books or comic strips such as The Far Side, and it was normal to take a book or magazine if they expected to be there a while. Now everyone just takes their phones. Story 47. I imported a compact disc into Windows Media Player on the computer, renamed all the songs manually because I had no internet, and listened while watching the visualizers. Story 48. Using the computer meant your entire family couldn't use the phone. You'd be halfway through downloading a song when someone picked up the receiver and the connection was lost. Story 49. I think people know that things were worse for gay people, but they do not really understand how bad it was. Almost everyone was closeted in the 1990s. Nathan Lane was not publicly out when The Birdcage was released. I graduated from a fairly large high school in a very blue state in the early 2000s, and no one was openly gay. Story 50. It was normal to go to a friend's house and knock on the door to see if they wanted to hang out without prior notice. Story 51. In the 1990s, it was rare to take pictures of your friends just hanging out or doing goofy things. Story 52. You could listen in on your siblings' phone calls, and if you knew how to plug and unplug the phone from the wall jack or socket, they would not hear the click when the phone was set back down in its cradle. But you would probably start giggling at some point and give it away. Story 53. In the 1990s, you had to watch live television to see a show as it aired. There was no way to pause or rewatch, so if you missed it, you did not get to see it again until it aired as a rerun. Binge watching did not exist. You had to wait a week for each episode. Story 54. Are you busy at 8 p.m. on Thursday? Well, I guess you are not going to see that episode of Crime Scene Investigation until the summer. Story 55. Porn was incredibly difficult to come by unless you were 18 or had someone willing to buy it for you. Those were dry times. Story 56. We remembered phone numbers. We made specific plans about where and when to meet. Story 57. We didn't all obsess over politicians like they were baseball players. Story 58. We did not need TikTok for things to go viral. We just knew that Marilyn Manson removed his ribs. Story 59. If you wanted a job, you would get a newspaper, pick out jobs you thought were interesting, and call the number. You want to be a mechanic? Sure. Start Monday. Story 60. You had to get off the internet so someone else could use the phone. Eventually, we got a dedicated phone line for internet access. You could burn a compact disc, which meant copying your files onto a blank one if you had the right hardware. I sold burned compact discs at school, both music and movies. Story 61. If you wanted to know something, you would ask your parents, friends, teachers, or librarians, or consult books. If you could not find the answer after that, you simply did not know and had to accept it. Now you just Google it or ask an artificial intelligence. Story 62. Mixtapes were a big deal. You recorded songs off the radio onto a cassette and hoped you did not accidentally cut the best part. Story 63. I was in elementary school at the time. I walked to and from school by myself, and no one cared. Story 64. When you left your house in the late 1980s and early 1990s, you were on your own. Your parents had no way of reaching you other than by physically going out and looking for you, and that was encouraged. The only rule was that you had to be back by dark. Story 65. Research for homework had to be done at the library unless your parents were wealthy enough to own an encyclopedia. Story 66. For some reason, we all had an incredible fear of quicksand. Story 67. If you called a girl, it is likely that her mother or father would answer the phone, or worse, one of her siblings. The same applies to the opposite sex. Story 68. Pay per text message. Free minutes after 9 p.m. No internet access on phones. Story 69. In 2004, presidential candidate Howard Dean was starting to gain momentum and shouted the word "yeah" during a speech. That was enough to sideline his campaign. Story 70. Life had more options. I was born in 1986 and had a computer in elementary school and was online since age 10. My parents were really naive. I grew up as a digital native. Until artificial intelligence happened, nothing changed for 30 years in my view. ICQ, an early instant messaging service, or WhatsApp, all the same. But I always had more than that. I could use Napster, but I also browsed through the compact disc aisles at large stores, listening to obscure stuff no algorithm would have suggested. I had a cell phone since age 12 and was always texting, but dates were much more reliable back then. People did not decide minutes before that they were too lazy to meet. People just showed up. Because when you had to call a landline and reach someone in the physical vicinity of their phone, it was much harder to set up a date or cancel it. People had the habit of showing up. I miss that. I have written emails for 29 years, but back then I also used handwriting, which is nice sometimes. We have real bodies in the real world, and our senses prefer a variety of textures, feelings, and motions. People also had more job options without going to college. Typing, office organization, and similar roles supported many families. Corporate savings from cutting those jobs created the many billionaires we see today. We had more options in every aspect of life. Many things that now feel without alternative already existed back then. I feel lucky to have grown up in the overlap of both eras. The old world is gone. It is hard to describe, and examples do not do it justice if you were not there. We also had Nickelodeon in Germany. Their television shows were great. Flying, even coach, was still kind of nice. What a nightmare traveling is today. Service down, fees up. Aside from the upper 1% and their upper 10% overseer class, we all got screwed over during the past 20 years. And people still vote these people into office. Maybe we deserve what we get. Even politics felt calmer. The Cold War was over. The Western world reigned supreme as a benevolent power, and global misery fell to all-time lows. Fewer children dying from pests or war. Terrorism was less of an issue. Even Russia seemed to be moving toward democracy and peace. Obesity was much lower and we did not have Ozempic. People still trusted science, whether about how many sexes there are or about the benefits of vaccines. Now everyone seems to be making up personal facts, left and right. Television news was actual news, not the shallow propaganda of today. Everything now has framing, wording, and agendas. Nobody just reports what happens and lets you form your own opinions. Local journalism still existed. I did not imagine this future when I thought about it as a kid. I watched Star Trek, Voyager. That was my vision of the future, not this current clown show. I agree with the line from The Matrix that the world of 1999 felt like a peak for us all in all. They could not have known, though. Story 71. If you did not go to the movies to see a particular film, you had to wait almost a year for it to be released on videocassette. Story 72. There were no smartphones. Digital cameras were only beginning to appear, so we do not have every mistake we made on record, in photographs, or on video. There were no social networks to share them on, either. Story 73. Before you bring that video home system tape back, make sure you rewind it. Story 74. The America Online Internet CDs were so common we used them as small frisbees. Music television actually played music. The worst domestic terrorist attack in American history happened and was largely forgotten. No wonder January 6th happened. Not everyone had a computer. If you did, your parents were doing well. Dial-up is the worst thing ever. If hell exists, that dial-up phone noise would be playing in the background. There used to be common decency in politics. You could get a fair amount of groceries for $20. Story 75. Some video games had to be installed from a series of floppy disks in order, and heaven forbid disk 9 of 12 was corrupted. But you could always call your friend who had the same game and copy their disk. My first 300 megabyte hard drive cost me $600. Story 76. I went to college in the late 1990s and early 2000s. After going out or late at night, there were plenty of places to get inexpensive food. With $5 you could be full. Cece's Pizza offered all-you-can-eat pizza and a drink for $5. A local Pizza Hut did the same on Friday and Saturday nights. At Taco Bell, Wednesday and Sunday tacos were 39 cents each. At Arby's, 5 sandwiches for $5. At Subway, a $5 footlong. They would even make a V-shaped cut in the top if you asked nicely, for those who remember. Not to mention cheaper drinks. Story 77. People are often aghast at this. You know how there is Black Friday and Cyber Monday? Cyber Monday exists because, in the early days of online shopping, home internet was unreliable but workplace connections were good. The Monday after Thanksgiving became the day when most people began their online Christmas shopping. Story 78. When you wanted a new movie from Netflix, you had to mail the old one, wait for it to arrive, and then wait for them to send the next one. Story 79. Hang on. Let me blow on this game cartridge quickly. Turn the television to channel 3 while I do that. Story 80. I think one thing that would confuse today's youth is how connected we were socially before the advent of social media. There was no need for constant updates on our friends' lives, but we still knew what we were up to. Unless you were a news junkie or a senior citizen, staying up to date on political matters was rare for young people. We would go weeks or even months without concerning ourselves with it. Now it is nearly impossible to escape political news without staying offline and avoiding other people. Story 81. In the early 1990s, a Macintosh IX, which was Apple's top-of-the-line computer, cost between $7,500 and $9,500. That was just for the computer box with a keyboard and mouse. I think of this every time people complain about how much computers cost today. Other noteworthy costs. A 1 gigabyte external drive cost $1,150. A used color wax printer cost $2,500. A grayscale, 300 dots per inch flatbed scanner cost $1,400. A 19-inch grayscale monitor with the required video card cost $1,200. A copy of Adobe Illustrator cost $600. Strangely, Photoshop came free with the scanner. Story 82. You could go out for a night, take a taxi home, and still have change from 20 pounds. Story 83. There was a charge for each text message, and it was fairly substantial, 25 to 50 cents for a long time. Story 84. On your way to meet someone, you had no way of knowing whether they would show up or of getting updates. Story 85. You would take a pencil, stick it in the cassette, and spin it to rewind the tape and save batteries on your portable player. Story 86. Gas cost under $2, internet safety was a thing, and McDonald's restaurants with play places were actually cool. I walked into my local McDonald's after years away and was shocked to find the interior depressingly empty. There was a map of some town on the wall that I knew was not nearby, and the play place was half the size, missing the awesome slides and the secret tunnel that led into the birthday room. Story 87. Planning to meet your friend halfway because you did not have the ability to contact each other once you left the house. Walking home from school in silence without music unless you chose to carry a Walkman or Discman, which many did not. Maintaining a contact book of phone numbers and addresses by hand, or looking people up in the telephone directory. Having your parents or siblings listen to your calls on the home phone line with no privacy. Story 88. Phone books were huge books delivered to your house. They listed every resident's name and phone number. Parents used to sit their children on them so the children could reach the top of the table. Before the global positioning system, we read MapQuest directions to our parents while they drove. It was a lot of responsibility. Story 89. If you did not know something and lacked the resources to find the information, you simply did not know it. Story 90. We had to use hardcover encyclopedias to access information. Story 91. Not having enough minutes left on my phone plan to make a call or send a text. Story 92. In the 2000s, as a child, I was told to walk up, knock on strangers' doors, and ask if I could hang out with the kid who lived there. I met a lot of kids that way. Story 93. If you left the house and were not at someone else's house, you could not be contacted in an emergency. Also, your parents would let you disappear for 6 to 8 hours at a time with friends and trust that you would return home relatively unharmed at the appointed time. You did. If something bad happened, you simply had to figure it out. There was no calling an adult. Story 94. Born in 1980. We used to carry quarters to make phone calls at payphones. We had to remember phone numbers. We used to call a special phone number to find out the exact time and the outside temperature. It was called Time and Temperature. Arby's 5 for $5 deal was 5 sandwiches for $5. Practically every gas station and grocery store was open 24 hours. There was a rumor that Marilyn Manson had a rib removed for sexual reasons. We bought albums before hearing them, based only on the artwork. If we wanted to know how to get past a boss in a game, we had to use a printed guide. There was a magazine for almost every interest. If we had cable, there was a channel we could switch to that showed what was on other channels. If not, we checked the newspaper. Story 95. Every Friday, my entire circle of friends met at the mall. We hung out for hours and occasionally got into minor trouble. There was no planning or discussion. We just showed up and did whatever. Story 96. By quietly picking up a second landline phone, your mother or any member of your household could listen in on the intimate phone conversations you had with your girlfriend. Story 97. Children over the age of 7 did not need adult supervision and could be in public with other children or home alone after school. There were no car pickup lines at schools. Grade school children were released from class to walk home or to find their parents' car parked in front of the school. We should bring that back. Story 98. You used to have to get off the internet to use the landline. Story 99. Everyone's phone number was in a publicly distributed book. Story 100. Blindly answering the phone, having no idea who was calling, was common in the 1990s and earlier. I remember caller identification appearing as a separate display. It was a huge deal. Story 101. It could take several days to download a small file. Mom yelled that she needed the phone and told us to get off the internet. Story 102. You could show up at your friend's house completely unannounced to hang out. Sometimes you might let yourself in without knocking. Story 103. Travel to another city or country and find a hotel by entering lobbies and asking if rooms are available. Story 104. Giving your personal computer a sexually transmitted disease or 40 to download MPEG, 1 audio layer 3 files from LimeWire or whatever iteration was not being shut down by the authorities. Story 105. When I traveled by airplane, I walked through a metal detector, spent time with friends at the gate, and then boarded the plane. When I landed, people met me at the gate. I once forgot I had a folding pocket knife. A security officer took it, measured it, and then returned it. You could bring a knife on board as long as it was below a certain size. Story 106. When you took a picture, you would not see the result for a week. Story 107. The greatest conceivable deal, in my opinion, is 12 compact discs for a penny. Story 108. We took photos and waited a week to get them developed, only to find that someone blinked. Story 109. Magazines. You waited every month for the next issue to arrive. It contained vital information, such as upcoming movies, albums, or television shows, and when and where to find them. It was not uncommon to have subscriptions to 20 or more magazines. We even got our news from magazines like Time and Newsweek, although those were weekly, not monthly. Imagine reading a well-thought-out article with poignant questions and answers days or weeks after a news event. Information moved much more slowly. Story 110. A car was to us what a phone is to you. It is the way we can finally have interactions with friends and be social without needing our parents to arrange it. Story 111. As a parent now, this is a big one. Unless your mother or father was the coach, no parents attended sports practices. My parents did not even drive me there. I threw my baseball glove over the handlebar of my bike and rode to practice by myself. Most games had only a handful of parents in attendance. Now parents and children are expected to schedule their lives around their children's sports. Parents are expected to volunteer a certain number of hours each year and to attend every practice and game. Story 112. I will send you a facsimile of my comment, but my pager just went off, so I had better get to a public pay telephone to check my answering machine. Story 113. Using a landline to call and ask a girl's mother, father, or brother if she was home and could come to the phone. Story 114. You had to memorize your friend's home phone numbers because if you lost that small slip of paper in your pocket, you lost the friendship. Story 115. You had to wait until Saturday to watch the cartoons you wanted. Then the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing would come on and ruin everything. Story 116. You could only check email on a personal computer. There was no social media as we know it today. You could go out for a whole night and no one would take a photo. Story 117. Ghosting was not really a thing. Dating wasn't just going on a site and never hearing back. Dating meant approaching a person, explicitly asking them out, and being rejected to your face, perhaps in front of others. If not directly, gossip would spread. Think of how many messages or swipes just never get replies and disappear into the ether. Now realize that a similarly large number represents the rejections you faced before landing a date. I'm not even sure my younger male cousins could stomach a single rejection, let alone dozens or hundreds. They have never had to build a tolerance for that. Story 118. Calling cards and long-distance calls used to make calling friends and family in other states a big deal. Now I refuse to even pick up when out-of-state family calls. Story 119. Talking on a mobile phone was more expensive during the day, so people waited for nights and weekends to speak freely. Depending on the plan, there was usually a limit on text messages. Some plans were unlimited, some allowed a couple thousand, and some allowed only 250. Story 120. The apex of communication at one time was the pager. Someone would call your pager and leave their phone number. If it was important, they would append it with the words 911. Then you drove around until you found a payphone that did not look like it was coated with hepatitis, deposited your coins, and called the person back. Story 121. The book clubs would mail free books if you filled out the form they sent. I got lots of free introductory offers in the mail. I remember thinking it was too good to be true, ordering about 12 fantasy novels with a pewter dagger gift with purchase. Lo and behold, 4 to 6 weeks later a big old package of books arrived, and I was thrilled. Then they started sending payment requests, which I promptly discarded. They were addressed to a heavily misspelled version of my name that someone at the catalog company had entered incorrectly. I was probably 13 at the time and assumed it was their fault for sending the books to a minor. I never got in trouble, and I suppose my fake name was sold to other catalog companies because I received similar offers. Story 122. We went out to play with the neighborhood kids, got into all kinds of shenanigans, and returned home for dinner or when the sun went down. We found a huge cardboard box and used it as a sled on a steep incline with a brick wall at the bottom. We usually jumped off before we hit the wall. It was fun. When you wanted to go to a movie, you had to look up the time in the newspaper. That seems primitive and strange to think about now. Story 123. When you went out, there was no way to contact you. You would come home and check your landline answering machine for messages. Story 124. You had to memorize your friends' home phone numbers. If you lost that tiny slip of paper in your pocket, you would lose the friendship. Story 125. You would leave work at 5:30 or 6 in the evening, and you were actually finished for the day. You probably did not carry a work laptop at all times, and your boss could not message you in the middle of the night. If they did email you, you would not see it until you arrived at the office the next day. Story 126. You had to memorize phone numbers and speak with your friends' parents just to reach them. Story 127. You had to physically go to places to do many things we now do online. Sometimes you could call, but some businesses required you to be present. If you needed clothes, you could order from a catalog, but if you needed them quickly, you went to the mall or Kmart. Rest in peace. To order food, you called and paid with cash or a check to the driver or the store. If you needed a computer part and you did not build computers, since basic consumer technology knowledge was mainly about software, you took it to Personal Computer World or a similar store and they helped you. You could not use delivery apps for snacks, and groceries were delivered only in some small towns. You could not finish your Christmas shopping in a single evening. You were out there in the world. Story 128. In the 1990s, you could not be on the landline and the internet at the same time. If someone in the house picked up the phone, you were disconnected. It was truly annoying. Story 129. Going out to look for your friends until you find them, like a quest. Story 130. When you went to meet someone, you often had to wait for them to arrive, sometimes for tens of minutes. Story 131. If you wanted to talk to your crush, you had to call their house and potentially ask their parents for permission. Story 132. If you wanted directions to go somewhere, you printed directions from the internet and hoped they were right. Felt like being a pirate searching for treasure. Story 133. If you said you were going to be somewhere at a specific time on a specific day, you had better be there. Story 134. We used to be able to dial a friend's house using only the last 4 digits of their home phone number. Story 135. Having a camera in your home pointed at the living room felt strange. Story 136. People went on dates long before knowing much about each other. You might have met someone at a party or known them from class or a shared interest. It taught compromise and how to appreciate others' interests and opinions. It also taught that, despite faults, people have redeeming qualities. Today, we swipe left and reject anyone for a single red flag, which eliminates any potential perceived conflict, but also causes us to miss out on much learning and experience. Story 137. I remember waking up as a little kid, around 9 years old, and running out of the house at first light, barefoot down the dirt road to my best friend Billy's house. His dad woke up early and had coffee ready, hot chocolate for Billy and me and bourbon for him. Billy and I would tear things up in the woods behind our houses with all-terrain vehicles and pellet guns. I would get home a few hours later, and no one cared as long as I made it to church. Story 138. Most high school students did not have cell phones. If you needed to contact your parents, you had to go to the main office for a valid emergency or use a payphone in the main hall. If your parents needed to contact you, the office would send someone to the classroom to pull you out of class or deliver a written message. Story 139. You had to pay separately for long-distance phone calls, and we all carried prepaid cards for this. Story 140. You could walk to the gates or meet people at the airport. Story 141. In the 90s, as kids we would just head out in the morning and come home when it got dark. Our parents had no idea where we were or what we were up to unless the police got involved. Story 142. Books were the primary means of finding in-depth, reliable information about a subject. You could not find information about a niche topic quickly online, and any research required a visit to the library. Story 143. Answering the phone without knowing who was calling was common. Another side of that was making plans to do something, for example, going to the movies or meeting at the beach. You made arrangements and had to trust that the other people would arrive at the right location in time. There was usually no practical way to get in touch with people once they left home. This pretty much went away as cell phones became ubiquitous in the late 1990s. Story 144. A 9-year-old might take a note from his mother to the corner store to buy her a pack of cigarettes. Story 145. You could not use your house phone while using the internet or a computer. Story 146. On weekends and during summer, you were not only allowed but expected to be outside all day. Story 147. When you like someone, you usually had to see them in person and speak to them first. Sometimes even on the phone for hours at a time. Crazy, right? Story 148. I forgot to mention, when you had to go to someone's house, people would give driving directions using landmarks. It was normal to say, look for a certain road. It's right after the Dairy Queen on that street. If you go too far and see a church, turn around. They were a whole list of instructions. It seemed ordinary then, but to people born after 2000 it probably sounds as archaic as an account of settlers on a wagon train traveling west. Story 149. I still walk into a restaurant prepared to say that I want to sit in the non-smoking section. Story 150. You could have a phone line or an internet connection, but not both at the same time. Story 151. Buying compact discs at a retail store like Sam Goody or for your entertainment was an experience. Near the compact disc racks there were small machines with headphones. You could scan the barcode of the compact disc you were interested in to hear a 10-second preview of the music before buying it. After a while, you would build a collection of compact discs that you could carry in a cool case with a zipper. Now that I can stream almost any song instantly, it amazes me that I used to carry a case with 20 compact discs everywhere I went. Story 152. If you liked someone and wanted to ask them out, you had to approach and talk to them face to face. Anything else, such as notes or having your friends pass along a message, was considered a red flag because you lacked the courage to talk to them directly. Story 153. A great way to get to know someone was to look at their digital versatile disc collection. Almost everyone had a massive one. Story 154. Having to choose between being online and making a phone call. Story 155. A time when no one was trying to spy on you through your technology, as long as you were careful. Blockbuster and movie rentals. Cartoons were actually entertaining. I remember when YouTube was good and not low quality. Story 156. The pants sagged and the wallet chains got out of hand. Story 157. Can't remember an actor's name? It's on the tip of your tongue, or you may be debating which actor it is with a friend. There is no internet movie database or internet connection to consult, so you have to search your video home system tapes, call someone else, or wait until you remember. Story 158. Directions were sometimes really hard. You had to describe a location like this. It was a dark little road. Make a right there. If you reach the drugstore, you have gone too far. It is just past the gas station. Some people were good at finding places and knowing the fastest routes. We would sometimes debate which route to school was quickest, and there was no definite answer. Story 159. There was so much positivity and hope compared to today. I am not saying everything was perfect, but in the West we felt like we had solved some big things, such as the end of the Cold War. Consumer goods and houses were affordable. There was a massive boom in building retail and leisure infrastructure because people had free time and money to spend. Men in the 1990s could be sensitive, women could compete in the workplace, and children had great toys, television shows, and video games without social media to make them feel bad. Britain was thriving in Europe. We had Concorde flying to New York in 4 hours and hovercraft crossing the English Channel in 1 hour. It all started to fall apart after September 11, 2001. The mood changed, we went to war, and then we experienced the housing crisis. The 1990s were a party. The early 2000s felt like a hangover. Story 160. We used to call MoviePhone to find showtimes for movies at the theater. Story 161. The internet consisted of many niche sites. It was not entirely corporate, and many sites were about sharing interests rather than making money. Story 162. Dial-up internet used a landline, so if someone picked up a phone in your house, the internet was gone. Fucking America Online. Story 163. A politician was once considered unfit for office because he misspelled potato. Story 164. I was pretty stoked when I upgraded to a 264 megabyte hard disk drive. Finally, unlimited space. Story 165. Acting dumb to look cool. Nerd shaming was common back then, so you did not want to seem too smart because you would be accused of showing off. Story 166. When something cool happened, you had to tell people and hope they believed you. It was very unlikely you had a video camera or even a regular camera with you. Story 167. I was 19, male, from Tennessee. Smoking and non-smoking sections of restaurants were a joke. There were buffets everywhere. There was so much cigarette smoke. People wore purity rings and pledged to God that they would not have sex before marriage. Boone's Farm, Mogan David 2020ths, or vodka in a water bottle were many people's first alcoholic drinks, often consumed at school. Dear Penthouse, I never believed it could happen to me, but... Story 168. Politicians and people discussing politics used to be able to converse with members of the opposite party without name-calling and blind us versus them hatred. Story 169. The continuously scrolling television guide forced you to wait for it to cycle if you missed a channel, and calling movie theaters to hear showtimes required waiting for the entire loop if you missed the announcement. Story 170. Watching television at a set time rather than catching shows whenever and on whatever device. Story 171. Every time I tell a young person that I have seen Shrek in theaters, they invariably say they did not even know it had been shown there. Story 172. A little more niche. For card game collectors, you were limited by what the store had and what your friends had pulled. Want to build a great Pokemon deck? You became a master at trading with whoever you ran into, because you never knew if and when you would see that Charizard again. You could not just log into Trading Card Game Player to buy a single card or order a bunch of packs from Amazon. Story 173. In the summer, it was entirely possible for me to spend the whole day with my parents not knowing where I was. Adults did not go around calling the police anytime they saw a child playing outside without being constantly watched by an adult. Story 174. I would get a pack of cigarettes and $5 worth of gas for my mom all the time. She would stay in the car while I went inside to get everything. I was about 10 years old. People seemed to have more trust back then. Smoking was allowed almost everywhere. Story 175. A book was sent to every resident containing each person's name, address, and phone number. Story 176. We used to have physical compact disc subscriptions. You could get 12 compact discs for $11. But then you would pay $9.99 per month for one compact disc. A catalog arrived so you could choose compact discs. Story 177. In the early 2000s, I made a moving picture experts group audio layer 3 compact disc that contained 193 songs. It was my metal mixtape and I gave it to my best friend. He now steals catalytic converters. Maybe it was my fault or the methamphetamine. We will never know. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.